the chat at the end of the talk today. So I thought I'd start just sharing some data on kind of where we are. And I'm guessing, unfortunately, that many of you are seeing this firsthand. And I've heard a lot of people talk about this as the new normal. And from what I see where I sit, I don't see a lot of big changes coming, although if we do wind up getting into a recession, maybe some of this will change. But just thought I'd start again with just some data. We continue from an economic perspective to still struggle with labor force participation rates. We're about 1.1% below where we were pre-pandemic. So currently we were about 62.3% labor force participation rate. And what that means practically in terms of workers and trying to attract workers, we're down maybe about 1.5 to 1.8 million people that are no longer in the workforce compared to pre-pandemic. We still suffer also from a lot of people looking for better employment opportunities. Over the past 6 months, we've had about 4 million people quit their jobs each of those months. And we still continue to remain at really high record levels of job openings. So we're still over 11 million openings, and that number has been very consistent, 10.5 to 11.5 million job openings. They track that each month, and that's been since October, November of last year. Other things that are contributing to some of the challenging times we're finding when it comes to employee folks is the fact that we have people that are aging out. I'm a baby boomer, currently 67. So, you know, folks in my generation are not working at the level that they used to. In fact, there's probably more than 54% of people that are over 55 that are now retired. We've seen retirement creeping down in age as well. So that's another contributing factor to finding workers. It's a competitive labor market. Again, as I'm sure many of you are aware, expectations have changed a lot, both with regard to salary and even what I would refer to as attitudinal changes. That is, what are people willing to do for an income? That has really changed. And that's almost across every industry. You see that from the trucking industry through just about everywhere else. I put a couple of pictures up here that kind of echo some of these points. The top picture is a sign below a Burger King sign that, you know, it sounds a little bit tongue-in-cheek. Sorry, we all quit. Sorry for the inconvenience. But we were in a facility the other night that typically is open till 9 p.m. that was closing at 7 simply because they didn't have enough folks to staff the facility. So very practical things like that. If you do have employees in your organization that you need to do some mentoring, now's a great time to do that. Another organization I used to work for, as people were aging out, would video record some of their employees and interview them. So they tried to make sure they maintained the important institutional knowledge. So a lot of things like that are important to consider these days. And I thought I'd just start with a simple question. And just put shorter or longer in the chat, and Matt will help me kind of just take a quick look at that. But the average length of the hiring process is still just under about 24 days. And I'm just kind of curious for your business, are you typically now shorter than that, or are you longer than that? So if you just type a word into the chat, I'd appreciate it, just so we can kind of understand where everyone is. So Matt, if you'd monitor that and just kind of give some feedback here, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. We have one response so far, and they said longer. Exclamation longer. Longer.
Maybe wait for 1 or 2 more of those to trickle in here.
Sure.
And it's interesting if that seems to be the consensus. I have a grant from the Department of Commerce Economic Development Administration where we do a lot of work supporting manufacturers across the state of Missouri That industry right now is a bit shorter than that. They've done a lot of work on their hiring processes to try to really get those down. But let me just touch on one last thing here before I move on. And one of the things to think about is how long does it take that offer to get out the door to the candidate? And this is just some data from an organization called Top Echelon Recruiting. And almost a quarter of candidates wound up rejecting an offer due to the length of time it took them to receive it. So there is a real need, particularly in today's competitive market, to try to shrink this window of posting of the opportunity to getting an offer out the door, to really shrink that as much as possible. So as you look at improving your workforce, the folks that work at your businesses, there are 4 basic tactics that you might want to keep in mind. The first is simply, how do you expedite the hiring process? How do you hire people faster? Others are to really focus on important generations that are now making up a greater component of today's workforce, which is Gen Y and Gen Z talent. And that'll be the topic of Thursday's presentation. You can also think about other strategies, one of which I simply refer to as smart hiring. How do you find employees that are going to stay at your organization so you have less turnover, you have to go through less training, you can save some costs from that perspective. And again, there's some other ways to not just hire smarter, but also to bump up employee retention. So today I'll cover this first topic of hiring faster. And Matt talked about the video being available, and I'm also happy to send out a copy of this deck to anyone who wants it. So I already talked about, the 23.8 day average and 22% dropout if it takes too long. One thing to think about in terms of expediting your hiring process is how long does it take a candidate to fill out an application? And there's actually some loss of candidates in the pool for applications that in their perspective take too long to complete. And so this is some data from Career Builder. And what it shows is that about 1 in 5 candidates are going to drop out of the application process if the application itself takes more than 10 minutes to complete. So something else to give attention to in your hiring process. I thought I'd start with just a little bit more data before we dive into a couple of practical things. And again, that's what I really hope you will get out of today, is a couple of practical ideas that you might be able to adopt into your business practices to improve your hiring process. On the left is shown some data from LinkedIn. This is from near the start of the pandemic through March of last year. And on the right, this is from some data from the DHI group. And you can either compare and look at where your business stands by job function or what type of sector you're in. So on the right side, construction tends to be the quickest industry to hire into. Even that industry is struggling to find workers. We had recently moved to a different home, and after 7 offers, finally found a home. But there's a housing shortage and it's hard to get workers in that industry. And so on and so forth, all the way down. Health services tend to take a bit longer there. By job function, engineering tends to be the longest, and typically it's a little bit quicker to go through a hiring process to get administrative assistance. And Matt, if there's any questions that people put in the chat, feel free to jump in. Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yep. So the place I really like to start, as I like to talk to companies about how do they go about expediting their hiring process, is to go through kind of what the current steps are that you have in your process. How many steps do you have in the process, and what are those steps? Something else to think about is how much time does each of those steps take? Is something sitting on a hiring manager's desk for longer than it needs to? And is that costing you candidates in the process? You might think about whether all the steps are necessary. Is there a bottleneck step? So for example, is there someone that's important to participate in an interview process that has some traveling coming up? Can that person have a substitute as a part of the interview process? And you might also think about agreeing to how much time we're going to allow for each of the steps of the process. Excuse me. So again, just to try and keep things on track and moving through your process as quickly as possible. Something else to think about is, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in another slide, is how effective is the application process, and is it easy for candidates? And are there pain points for the candidates in that process, the application process, that you need to address? If you're part of a multi-site organization where you have a headquarters, are there issues that you have to work through or that you might be able to work through with your headquarters in terms of agreeing to a more expedited type of process? Do they understand what local drivers you have to live under, what the competition is that you have to go up against, that you're competing against when it comes to getting candidates? So making sure there's some understanding there might also lead to some improvements in the hiring process. Something that's maybe process related, but starts even a little bit before that, is, are you getting the right applicants in the process? And what do you know about those applicants? So I thought I'd talk a little bit more about some of those. So on the left here, you can see some of the typical parts of the hiring process. It really starts with identifying the vacancies that you have within your business and having a good understanding and an ability to share that understanding in a form that's easily understood by candidates and quickly understood by candidates in terms of what you're looking for in a job candidate. Where are you posting your positions? I have a slide later on that dives into an example of social media, and Facebook pages, Instagram accounts for businesses are now critically important to giving you the access to the most candidates. And many, in fact, most candidates are going to surf your sites to make a decision about whether they want to apply and if you're the type of company they or business that they'd like to work for. But some of the detail, as you go through and try to understand your process, what are the steps? How much time is involved and what's the sequence? You know, who makes the decisions? Where are they involved at the process? You know, how long does it take for a resume to get reviewed? Do you go through and do reference and employment verification checks? And when do you do those in the process? Some companies do those very early on. Others might do those a little bit later in the process based on what their candidate pool looks like. Do you have your candidates do a drug test? And what's your relationship with a testing company? Do you do a criminal background check? Are you prepared to make an offer? Is the salary and benefit clear to the applicant from the word go as you start the process? Is that posted? And what does your interview process look like? And last but not least, one other important thing to consider is, what do you know about the folks that are applying to your business? Are they currently employed? What's going to be important to them, and what might motivate them to say yes to a job offer that you will extend to them? Do you know what timing they have to make their decision? Are they going to make a decision within the next week, the next 2 weeks? And are you in a competitive situation? And in today's age, most of the folks you're talking to, you're probably going to be competing for. So one of the things I would encourage you to do is to really go through a critical evaluation of the benefit of each step in your process and the need for each step in the process. There's a lot of phone interviewing being done. There's a lot of Zoom interviewing being done. Those are trends over the past few years. They've been going on before, but I think we see a lot more of that today than in the past. Some businesses will still bring in individuals, in fact, many for an on-site interview. I don't know a lot of businesses that today typically do a second interview. Years ago, when I got my first job out of college, my interview was a 2-day interview. I was actually on site at the facility for 2 days. And again, I don't know too many that do that anymore. Some of them are a few hours, some of them half a day, some of them go up to a day. Something else I'd encourage you to think about is, again, talk to the candidates, those you've been able to attract, and if they are willing that you weren't able to attract and you gave an offer to, see if they will give you any insights. What worked in the process from their perspective? Were there any problems that they saw that maybe allow you to improve your process? And again, so it's important to think about the candidate path, and hopefully you can get some feedback from recent candidates that you've hired, and maybe as well some that you've lost. One last thought kind of on this front. If you do make changes to your hiring process, dry run those with current employees. Make sure you test out the revisions you're making so that they're having the effect that you want and that you're not going to be creating any new problems. Another important part of expediting the process is to make sure that you have an accurate job description. It should include a list of responsibilities and duties. You know, typically you're going to maybe have a salary range posted as part of the description. You want to have some important information about you as an employer there. And you want to highlight other things that you think are going to be important to the candidate. Today's applicants, particularly for Gen Y or Gen Z, who am I going to be working for? How am I going to be advancing in the organization? How do I develop professionally? And again, it's really easy if you plan out the interview process well, it's really easy to highlight and be prepared to discuss those types of issues with candidates that are coming to interview with you. I think back occasionally to an earlier job I had in my career where I found out about part of the job in the press release announcing my hiring at the company. I had no idea I was going to be doing that part of the job. It wound up being 30 to 40% of the job. And it's great to avoid those types of surprises for people you're bringing on board. So just make sure you have an accurate job description of what that person is going to be doing. Something else that's important today is to really highlight the why of working for your company. A lot of folks that are candidates for jobs are really interested in alignment of their values and purpose in life and what your company does. And I'll talk a little bit about that on Thursday when I talk about Gen Y and Gen Z and get some great examples there. It's maybe a little bit easier, for example, for the medical profession, you know, when folks are trying to attract nurses, they have the Florence Nightingale oath. People go into that profession for very specific reasons. But a lot of other businesses have been great about highlighting the why they should work for their company and really stating their values so employees can look for that alignment with those values. Last but not least, and this starts to get into some of the technology aspects of hiring, on your site, have an apply button that's really easy to navigate. I'll talk just briefly for a couple of minutes about the interview process. And we've touched on some of this already in terms of whether you're going to do a phone, a Zoom, or on site. Think very critically about what questions you're going to ask the candidate. This picture in the lower left looks a little bit funny, but if there's a specific task that you need that person to do, you need to make sure that they're going to be able to do it. And I don't know if any of you have ever put together IKEA furniture, but good instruction manual, but you still need some basic skills in assembly. The picture in the upper right is just meant to show that you're asking all the right questions of the candidate that you need to have answered. And you either need to get a yes, a no, or not sure or maybe out of those types of questions when you're asking the candidate. Who's involved in the process? We've talked about that a little bit already. And I know some businesses that will do a verbal offer to a candidate, then we'll go do the background check, and then we'll get the full offer out to the candidate. And again, something to think about if there's an opportunity there to expedite your process. Think about what questions you're asking the candidate, and also what questions past candidates have asked of your business. And again, typically when you're asking candidate questions, you're going to want to ask them the same type of questions. There should be questions of purpose where you're trying to get some information that's going to allow you to get to a decision point on whether you're going to extend an offer to that candidate. When it comes to understanding what past candidates have asked, the questions those past candidates have asked of your company, just think about what your answers have been and whether those answers have really helped attract candidates. So simply stated, never forget the interview is a two-way street. If you wind up with some candidates that are close but not quite, maybe you keep them in the pool. And I've already talked about the importance of debriefing after attraction or loss of good candidates. One thing that's really important, again, with today's candidates is transparent and timely communication. A lot of prospective candidates will form an opinion about the company based on the quality of the communication that they get from the company. So you might think about what's online and what's automatic. I know companies that have one in particular, they use a technology platform, and when a part of the process is completed, the candidates automatically get a text to let them know where they are in the process. That step has been completed. Here's what's next, and here when you can expect to hear back after that next step. So again, just keeping them in the loop, having them understand what that process timeline looks like and how much time is going to be required for those steps can be really helpful in keeping candidates in the pool. So part of this excellent candidate experience really comes down to effective communication. You might also be thinking about the level of technology that you want to use in your process. There's a lot of places to post opportunities, from Indeed to Monster to LinkedIn. I mean, the list goes on and on. But don't shortchange job fairs. A lot of campuses around our state still have job fairs if you're looking for talent with a college level experience. You should have effective social media postings, and I'll show an example here in a minute. What does your application look like? Is it fully online? Is it paper? Is it completed within 10 minutes? And do you have some selling points for your company online? Do you have videos you can take to a job fair, videos that you post online that show a minute snippet of some of the different experiences that an employee is going to have at your business? I'm guessing that most of you already have templates for many of these types of things, whether it's an offer letter, a contract, a hiring bonus. But you might also think there are other tools out there, and there is third-party software as a service that can really assist you if you think you need a higher level of help in this area. There's a software out there now, believe it or not, that'll scan resumes looking for key skills and experiences. There's software out there that will send automated text message when a part of the process is completed. So lots of different things to think about as you think about your current process, what's working well, and how you might improve it. So this is my next to last slide. I just thought I'd pop up part of a Facebook page of one of the companies that we've done some work with in the past. This is a manufacturer in Northeast Missouri called Senveo, and I thought their page was particularly well done. And let me tell you why I think there's just some great stuff here. I think that really nice bold graphics at the front, looking at a look back at some of the history. Okay, they're a printer and an envelope manufacturer, but also taking a look down the road, focused on the future. Down in the lower right, the future of innovation. Another thing I really liked about this site is the fact that they highlight employee contributions to their business. And again, these can be real attractors to a prospective employee. Here's a call out to Gerald Taylor, who's worked for the company for 50 years, right front and center at the Facebook page. Pretty cool recruiting tool. And again, pictures, lower right, looking at just the team atmosphere. Make it about the people, okay? The most important asset of a company, typically in any cases, it's people. So it lets prospective employees know that their employees are valued. And again, they have other things for hot job of the week. And if you look in the middle, this is a multi-site business. What are they looking for? Okay, what are some of the key things? And again, this last thing that I've pointed out previously, hone your mechanical skills, working on plant equipment, rebuilds, complex troubleshooting, gives the prospective employee a chance to plant that seed for the fact that they're going to have an opportunity for professional growth and skill building. So effective social media, really a key part of recruiting and a good effective hiring process. So I mentioned at the beginning that I'm happy to shoot out a copy of the deck. These are some of the sources that I used in putting this presentation together. I also went to places like the Bureau of Labor Statistics and a couple of other sites like that for some of the data I showed early in the process. But if you want to copy the deck, all of these are hyperlinked, and you can click on any of these if you're in presentation mode, and the hyperlink will pop up right to the source data. So